out of relationships, but to put energy into relationships, and then realize that relationships and the function of relationships is what brings abundance,
growth.
Yeah, but growth not in that linear sense, like
Thriving.
this grows and that doesn't.
Thriving.
But right,
Thriving,
yeah. A more general sense of well-being, where everything is stable and increasing in a positive direction all the time, and not just the isolated things that are able to extract from other relationships. So, I guess if I was to start back at the beginning, the fundamental reality of the situation that we're in, the mythology that we operate under as this society, is that the only way to care for yourself is to extract energy from relationships, be those interpersonal relationships, relationships with the environment, relationships with yourself. And that's mostly what I feel like healers are doing, is they're trying to stop the process of you taking from aspects of yourself to feed other aspects of yourself that have been promoted. So in this personal sense, like, so much of our healing has to do with ending the capitalistic relationship that we have with ourselves. And this is where so much of the self-worth problems that we have come from, and which most of our personal issues stem from. Our depression, our anxiety, and all of this, they come from how we relate to ourselves because of how we've been taught to relate to the environment and to relate to others. Because the only way that you can have an extractive relationship with the world is if you have an extractive relationship with yourself. So, and you could say that we've been taught to have an extractive relationship with our spirit, and that's the fundamental crisis of our age. And the best way to ensure that is to be isolated. And the best way to be isolated is to treat all of your relationships not as relationships, but as objects that you siphon power from to add to your own personal power. And the way I look at it, that's the system of private property. The system of saying, this is mine, this isn't yours, and having that be a definitive way of relating with the entire world. Even saying to nature, you get a piece of land, what comes from this land is mine, it's not yours. It's not the birds, it's not the gophers, it's not the mice, it's not the ants, it's not the aphids. None of them have say, this is my domain. And that's how you end up with dirt instead of soil. That's how you end up with a field of wheat instead of a vital forest ecosystem that supports healthy meteorological systems, healthy watersheds, healthy everything. So the task at hand is, how do we change the mythology from one of separation and extraction to a mythology of cooperation and interdependence and synergy? How do we have synergetic relationships with each other? And the mentality of a lot of people, the kind of utopian mentality, is you just do it. You just have those kinds of relationships. But it ignores the fact that that's not where we're at. Exactly. And we have to start precisely where we are. Yes. And precisely where we are is in extractive business relationships. So the way that I look at the co-op model is a transitional model that says, okay, you see yourself as individual actors with individual purpose, needing individual resources that are separate from everyone else. If you can cooperate inside of that framework and say, okay, we're all individuals, how do we recognize that our relationships are stronger than our individual extractive ability? And then leverage our individual gifts to grow these relationships, recognizing that the relationships will in turn grow us. And what kind of is a viral component to that is, the more that you do that, the more you start feeding into relationships, and the less you start feeding into your extractive ideas about the world and your separative ideas of the world. Because, there's the Buddhist saying, I think it's Buddhist, that watch your thoughts, for your thoughts become your actions. Watch your actions, for your actions become your behaviors. Watch your behaviors because they become your habits. Watch your habits because they become your character. It's the same kind of idea. It moves from one to the next, and the more you move it from one realm to the next, the more you move the myth from just an abstract idea, which is where the utopians stay, is in the abstract idea of this thing.
So you're almost working backwards in that paradigm you just spoke about. You're working from the action all the way back to the thoughts. So instead of starting from within, which a lot of people don't know how to do, you're starting outside.
You're starting kind of in the middle.
Okay.
You're trying to build, because at the end you want to build a particular kind of habit and character, which you could call culture. Like when you have shared habits and character, you have a culture, a shared culture. And that culture becomes generative. It ensures more of itself. It becomes self-generative. So when you have, so to get to that kind of system, you have to move from the individual perspective, which is your thoughts. Because your thoughts only exist inside of your bubble. Your actions don't just exist inside of your bubble.
Exactly.
And neither do your words, really. And your words are kind of the gap in between, which is where these kind of cooperative agreements come into place. When we're making these agreements about how we're going to cooperate inside of a system, we're essentially moving from the realm of abstract thought, saying this is what I want, to this is what I will do, to then doing it. And then the more you do it, the more you generate a kind of a field around that promotes more of the same. So when I look at the co-op model, and this is where Seppi said the term composting, like I call it composting capitalism. We have a set of relationships that currently exist. They're extractive relationships. How do we take the fact that we currently enact extractive relationships and what those look like, and then use what we gain from those relationships instead to promote cooperative relationships? So right now we all have businesses, we all need to maintain our own homes and our own families separate from each other. If we can do that in coordination with one another and build a cooperative spirit and a cooperative framework for working together, then we start to take the energy that we're using in extractive relationships and putting it towards cooperative relationships. And as those cooperative relationships grow, aka as your co-op grows, you're actually increasing the incentive to do less of the extractive relationships and more of the cooperative relationships, because naturally they're more powerful. So once you enter into that framework and you start finding more ways to do that, you start building a field around this whole concept of working cooperatively. So like my broader vision is that we don't just have these individual co-ops, that we use these co-ops as places to invest in more co-ops. So you would have this healing co-op, and then you might have a food co-op, a co-op of CSAs that all work together, where you can get from all of these different farms different foods. And then you might have another co-op that's people who deal with your cars. And then if they're all inside of a co-op too, where they're sharing risks and rewards inside of a broader co-op across genres, across skills and abilities, what you're doing is you're creating you're creating the ability for people to move their whole lives into a cooperative framework. Right, exactly. So if you have a big network like this, and then you can move it into new realms, you can start using this bigger co-op who then is feeding into where each have their own individual funds. Like I was saying earlier, you could have like a 20% charge to anybody who's in the co-op network, and especially if you're doing shares or you're doing member-owner co-ops, where people's money is getting invested into it and they're getting a discount on their fees compared to non-members, then more people are encouraged to join the network, and some amount of money that's coming into the network goes into a seed fund to encourage more of the same. So like if everybody inside of the network had 15% that went into maintaining their individual co-op, and then 5% that went to maintaining and investing in a broader co-op network, eventually what you can do is you can create a new bank, a cooperative bank that exists in between all of them, which acts as a way to fund things like cooperative housing and land trusts And once you have cooperative housing and land trust, you're changing the relationship with land, which is the fundamental layer of private property that exists, and the fundamental way that the system as it is maintains a power over us to continue to extract from one another. Because once you have land and you have a place to live, and you're living under a different arrangement than extractive relationships, you're living under cooperative relationships, you start to have the capability to act more freely and to act more in coordination with one another. And you start actually gaining the ability to leverage against the other system, because all of a sudden it is more enticing to join the system, the network of relationships that you have, than to join the extractive relationships out there, which keep you in a rat race.
Love it.
So you breed a cooperative atmosphere without trying to like create an ideal situation. You're just taking what's here, which is people needing to feed themselves, take care of themselves, and work to offer their gifts, and you start to funnel a little bit of it at a time towards a different way of doing that.
Beautiful.